Lindsay Milne joins us. She's with Bernstein Shur. She's an attorney on the business side with Bernstein Shur, one of our great partners and sponsors out there. Lindsay joins us, GMI Studios. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, good morning, Jack.
Good morning to you. You focus on the restructuring side for businesses, I guess the term bankruptcy, which, interestingly enough, Lindsay, in the last several years of I would say since 2008, the so-called Great Recession, then we had the displacement of maybe the first year of COVID, and maybe through today, I think bankruptcy became more of a common term for businesses. It was a word that you never wanted to utter if you were in business, I'm sure, but you deal with a lot of restructuring, and not all companies, it's not all very clear of what has to happen, and there's a lot of gray area. Tell us a little bit about your background and your practice area with Bernstein Shur.
Sure. So I went to college here in New Hampshire and then took a trip down to New York for law school and started my career there right after Lehman Brothers crashed. So you might imagine that the bankruptcy world was booming at that point. And it was a great time to, get my feet wet and get a lot of experience with some complex restructuring deals. And so then I relocated I'm actually based out of Portland, Maine now, and I have continued to work in restructuring. I think it's a really interesting space. You raised the question what bankruptcy really is, and you're right that it has quite a stigma attached to the word, but it can be a great tool for businesses that have a sound operating model but simply need to restructure some otherwise debilitating debts. And so, bankruptcy, a lot of people associate that term with the closing up of a business, but it need not be that. It really is a term of art that means the filing of a document in federal court that invokes a protection against creditor collection actions and gives that company that filed for bankruptcy the power to restructure certain debts and shed certain liabilities. And so that's what bankruptcy really is. It's not necessarily a liquidation and the closing of doors.
Yeah, I would think that, I'm not saying this is true, but you would certainly see it given your background in New York and now in New England, that a larger corporation, it's quite often you'll hear, we've seen airlines, we've seen major companies with tens of thousands of employees technically file federally to restructure, to kind of get that year or so to rework creditors, for example, to negotiate some debt that's sort of pulling them under, but their business may be sound. But what about a small or medium-sized business? How punitive would having to take the action of filing bankruptcy if they didn't have as many assets to restructure? Does it get more difficult?
Not necessarily if you've put the right steps in place to plan. So if you were to talk with your creditors in advance, set up a plan, work with an advisor to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row, you can get in and out of bankruptcy relatively quickly, and it can really pave the way for a successful post-restructuring operation. And that's true for small businesses, medium businesses, especially in light of the so-called SBRA, Small Business Reorganization Act, which Congress enacted. The timing is interesting. It was right on the eve of COVID. It actually didn't have to do with COVID. But if you're a business that has less than $7.5 million in liabilities, you have access to a streamlined procedure that has reduced costs, fewer constituencies that you might have to negotiate with. And this is a recognition that bankruptcy can be an expensive process, but we want small businesses to have access to it because, as a policy matter, we want to incentivize those businesses that have a good model, that are employing people in the community to continue doing their good work.
Lindsay Milne with Bernstein Shur. Lindsay, what kind of a business stigma could be attached to someone, say a medium-sized company that did file and reorganize and 2 or 3 years later was doing pretty well, or even on a personal side, someone who has to file because they have to rework their liabilities, and then they maybe want to go look at getting new credit from a lender. Are lenders more open about if they sit down and you talk with them about it or they talk to you, someone like you on a conference call or with Bernstein Shur, an attorney, to talk with them to make them comfortable? Does having to file bankruptcy, does that create a stigma for future borrowing?
On the commercial side, so putting the individual aside for a moment, banks are pretty sophisticated, especially if you're accompanied by counsel and you've got a compelling story to tell and hopefully a success record of successful operations after the bankruptcy. Banks are going to look at the numbers. They're going to look at your balance sheet. And yes, the fact that you filed for bankruptcy will be part of the risk profile that the bank assesses, but it shouldn't be a major factor if you otherwise have a healthy business and a good story to tell. And on the individual side, things might look a little bit more complicated. But if you're advised, you should have a constructive discussion with the bank.
You mentioned something in the beginning, Lindsay, talking about, I was going to ask you this, how important is communicating with your creditors if you are trying to restructure, to let them know what the situation is, what the game plan is, what the options are? Communication, how important is that?
I think it's essential, but more important than simple communication is having a choreographed plan to communicate, because depending on how your relationship is with your creditors, the folks you do business with, you don't want people to get the wrong impression. You want to make sure that you understand exactly what your plan is, whether that is to, quote, work out your debts outside of bankruptcy, or if you're actually going to use bankruptcy as a tool. You don't want to spook your business partners who might not understand the ramifications of your plan. So it's important to work with an advisor, develop a plan, work on your communication method and exactly what you're going to be explaining to your business partners. And then I do think communication is very important. It makes your business partners feel that they're a valued part of the plan, and they feel that they have visibility into your business going forward, so that they can work with you to restructure and come out a healthier company, instead of, tightening trade terms or deciding that they don't want to do business at all.
Lindsay, Milne, before we let you go, Bernstein Shur, you mentioned your time coming out of New York City, now in Maine and New England. Have we seen in the last year or two, we've seen so much, I think, adjustment more in work style habits and remote working for companies and big companies and displaced workers. But the mission's gone on, I think, sometimes better than people would have expected. And I think some of this remote work is going to stay for a while, regardless of the virus levels coming down. My question is, in general, over the last 24 months, in general, you're not the SBA, but how would you say you've seen regional bankruptcies or restructuring needs? Has it been kind of constant, sporadic, down, up? How's it been overall?
In general, it's been down, and that might surprise folks, because obviously lots of people are suffering, whether it's revenue, foot traffic, et cetera. But the legislative relief providing cash to businesses that are having financial trouble, number one. And number two, the fact that banks, which collection activity will often be a driver of restructuring activity, banks have been more patient, because they don't want a situation where they put pressure on all of their borrowers at once and end up taking back their collateral, for instance, or have a bunch of failed loans in their portfolio. Banks have been patient. They've worked with borrowers through this difficult time. And because banks have been patient and businesses have had cash, they've been able to weather the intermediate storm. But I do think that once things normalize a little bit and banks resume ordinary activity and businesses rely more on their cash flow from operations, we will see businesses needing to, or businesses should, hire restructuring counsel to make sure that they have a clear path forward for streamlined operations and a healthy business.
And can someone contact you just for a consultative appointment before they decide on engaging if this is restructuring is something for their business?
Absolutely. Our lines are always open, and I, in particular, am happy to talk to folks and learn about their business and figure out whether I can be helpful.
All right, Lindsay Milne with Bernstein Shur. Thank you very much, Lindsay, and we'll get you back again soon. Good morning, New Hampshire GMI Studios up into Maine, and, of course, listening region across our network of news talk stations. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Jack. Have a great day.